This is the Biblical Mind Podcast, produced by the Center for Hebraic Thought. Honest 5-star reviews help others find this podcast. Visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org for articles and videos that explore the deep structures of Scripture.
I do feel that when I do my proposing of my proposals about how we know, I have what I'm actually doing is kind of relaying the accents on what they're already doing, and saying, look, that's not knowing, this is, and you've been doing it all your life. And so I quickly revert to seemingly lowly, but I think awesome examples like riding bike or learning to read or playing football or watching football, things that we that are everyday ordinary skills, at least for some of us, I have to kind of insist that they tell me a skill and then talk it through. So, that's how I get to relay the accent. And it's really that exercise that breaks or goes over what your word was, hurdle. It kind of sidesteps the hurdle. So you can say, look, you do this all the time. This is cool. It's amazing. It's subsidiary-focal integration, to use Polanyi's language. And this is knowing. So one of my PowerPoint presentations in the last couple of years, I called How to Ride a Bike. And do you remember the child book by Robert McCloskey, the beautiful book called Make Way for Ducklings? Do you remember that book? You don't?
No, only because my parents didn't read books to me, but that's okay.
Well, you need to just go buy it because his pencil charcoal sketches are beautiful from the 1940s, Newbery winter, not Newbery, Caldecott and all that. So Make Way for Ducklings is famous. And there's a little boy on a bike in there. And so I took that picture and put it in my PowerPoint. And then, I call him Mel because he's going pell-mell, right? But then, get people to think about riding a bike, how that works. And then you can get, you can then relabel what it is that they're doing and say, look, this is knowing, you're doing it. Now, let's now take it into these other goofy questions that you might have that don't seem so goofy. And what does that do to the knowledge is information mindset? And Dru, if you're talking about bike riding, the knowledge is information paradigm, which dominates our modern age, is the bike rider reverting to look at his foot on the pedal. And the point is, the whole performance grinds to a halt, and focal information is the very thing that blinds you to the real, cuts you off from the real. So it's very, you ought to feel that in your gut. You can't ride the bike and look down at your foot. You just can't. Yet somehow we've ensconced and exalted a model, a paradigm of knowing that's focal information.
And that recalls to me, so we're talking about this book that I would say kind of started the revolution amongst Christians and other, outside of Christianity as well, Longing to Know, published in 2003. I was one of your students. Actually, I just graduated from seminary in 2003, right around that same time. But one of the things that I find is that most Christians around my age, so I'm nearing 50, they all know what postmodernism is, or at least they have a caricature of it in their mind. But what surprises me is that most of them don't know what modernism is. They don't understand what postmodernism was a reaction to. And so it's shocking to me that we are here in 2023, and what you just described as one of the hurdles, knowledge is information, is actually not about postmodernism, but it's about a 1940s, 1950s view of knowledge, right? Do you find that this is still prevalent in where you live?
Yeah, I think so. I really feel, and you and I have mentioned this in passing to each other before. We think postmodernism maybe was over in the 1980s, and it wasn't the
Right.
success at subverting, as it should have been trying to do, the Enlightenment project. And so the
Mm.
Enlightenment project is continues to be exalted. We
Mm.
we profess knowledge is power.
Right.
And other things like that. However you use the term postmodern, and that's, obviously up for debate. And I have to say, I
Right.
think I grew in my understanding after I had written Longing to Know, after I taught it
Mm.
for, semester after semester at Geneva College. I feel like postmodernism was intended as a response to modernism, and that was a good idea. But I feel that
Mm.
lots of people out there, because they're stuck in the modernist mindset, I call that certainty or bust. Right. So
Right.
there's
Yeah.
lots of, at least in the past, when you were, back in 2003, people were all about certainty, or they assumed that the alternative was relativism or subjectivism.
Right.
And I think that either or is itself endemic in the modernist mindset, and it's still in play. And so what we need is a third alternative, and I do call it that in Longing to Know, which isn't a compromise that kind of tries to balance one as over against the other. We need to like rip up those dichotomies and start again. And that's, I actually thinking about riding your bike is what you have to do, because
Mm.
nowhere in a skill do you have either modernism or postmodernism, whatever you call it. You just can't do athletics or music, or any
Right.
of those things, unless you've got a really an approach to the world that's more like what gets described by Michael Polanyi and by Longing to Know, and you in
Yeah.
talking about the way knowing works in the Bible.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are going to hear that and they're going to say, great, bike riding, athletics, laying out for a Frisbee, which is still one of those sticky examples that you used 20 years ago that hangs around in my brain. But we're talking about, let's talk about engineering and science, right? Can you live in that modernist or postmodernist world and still do science?
Well, the thing is that what modernity has done is taught us to misdescribe.
Hmm.
And so even a scientist or an engineer, they're going to exalt the linear and the the scientific method, that kind of a thing. They're so it's like their implicit philosophy. It is modernist, yet their success goes with subsidiary-focal integration, these terms that you and I are familiar with, that we got from Michael Polanyi and have in Longing to Know. So that's why I say I kind of have to relay the accents so you can see what you're actually doing. So engineering, I have two engineer daughters. It's just amazing. I'm very proud of them. Well, it takes breakthroughs of beautiful insight to come up with themes. You and I, with our St. Louis connection, if you're like me, you just love that arch. That is a thing of beauty, and it won a contest. That's why it's there. So that's engineering. And, I now live in Pittsburgh, and I'm very proud of the fact that all that steel got imported from Pittsburgh, so there's this connection to the arch. But so that's the point I'm making. There's creativity all over that, but we have kind of inhaled or it's in our water, this modernist caricature of what it is that we're doing when we know, which leads you to ask, where would we be as a world and a culture and a society if we had done it right, or had been authentically aware of what it is that we were doing? And as I know, because we both like Michael Polanyi, he said, if science is, a collecting of information, no scientific discovery could ever happen. But it does. So maybe you need to rethink what it is you're actually doing when you're involved in discovery. You have to accredit some things that you are relying on and indwelling with trust and artistry. They're called clues and other things, and if you're relying on clues, the whole point is that you have to understand them and you have to entrust yourself to them well in advance of whatever it is you're in quest of, which is so cool. And we do that all the time. We do it all the time.
Well, one of the dictums that I've heard from you, or dicta, is, that knowing is risky, right?
Yeah.
And so you're describing this aspect that we step out into the world and we lean into clues in order with the hope of understanding the real world in some new way.
Yeah, and risky confidence, risky, responsible confidence. And confidence is actually a richer artistry. And again, if you're going to be a baseball outfielder, that risky, responsible confidence is what describes that. And it's risky, responsible confidence that opens reality to you. If you can play professional baseball and you actually get scored errors if you make a mistake, that would not pertain to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So to see some outfielder hurdle themselves across many feet or ram into the wall or something and field that ball, it's just, well, we love it. We rewatch those, right? We love it, but that's
the highlight reels. Yeah.
Risky confidence.
Highlight reels are not some dude standing in an outfield.
Right.
It's him practicing the risky part of the endeavor. Yeah.
Yeah.
That risky, confident part.
I think, every Sunday people watch football, and football is just so glaringly, obviously subsidiary-focal integration. It's relying on clues to focus on and invite a pattern. It's like there's the foreground, the O-line, and all your guys. I don't know all the names, but an artist quarterback like we saw two of in the Super Bowl, they're attuned subsidiarily to the whole dynamic moving thing, and then they achieve this breakthrough of artistry and hit their guy down there in the end zone. That's beauty.
I just love this conversation so far because I'm like, has Western Pennsylvania done something to Esther Meek? Because in my mind, there's this extremely shrewd philosopher, Esther Meek, who I sat in a seminar with as a graduate student, just like awestruck at your mastery of all of this philosophy. And then now it's all sports illustrations. Not that those are mutually exclusive from one another, but I just love how it's all turned into the sports illustrations.
Well, what? Back in the day, I was using magic eyes, and nobody now knows more.
I know. I have a whole book of them back here that I use with students, but it's you have to reteach them from scratch. Yeah. Maybe I should ask then, because when I met you, you were still kind of a homemaker philosopher working your way out into the academic world again after, being out of it for a while. I don't know if you'd consider what you're doing being out of it for a while, but not in the formal academic world of presenting papers and doing all that weird stuff that we do. How did you get into philosophy in the first place?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I around age 13 found myself with some very odd questions that I was really so embarrassed of that I didn't even tell anybody, especially as my family practically lived at church. And one of them was, how do I know that God exists? The other was, the bigger one was, how do I know there's anything outside my mind? And I thought that was the weirdest thing, which is why I didn't tell anybody. But I felt that I was only certain of ideas in my head. And because I had ideas in my head, they literally were blocking the way for me to get outside of them to see if they matched what was out there. And so it was like the whole thing felt like this big screen, and I had no proof for the thing that I most needed proof for. Now, like I said, I was 13 and I was, I've never had, anything but self-doubt. But then what happened was my mother at that point was working in a Christian bookstore, and she always brought home the first editions of books and read them, she being cool like that. And I followed her red pencil underlinings through Francis Schaeffer's The God Who Is There. And my conclusion was, it's a difficult book, and it's, but anyway, my conclusion
he rambles a bit.
My questions were not sin or dumb. They were philosophical, and responses to them had shaped whole cultural epochs across the disciplines. And that fired my love of the interdisciplinary, including artistry and science and all of that. And it made me realize that my questions were philosophical. Then it was a few more years before I found out that you could actually study philosophy. And when I did, the change happened in 12 hours. And I've never looked back. Because I thought I surely wasn't smart enough to do this, but I felt morally obligated because these were the most important questions. And it's not that I don't love Jesus and believe the Bible and all that, but if you have no proof for the world outside your head, you got some work to do, I also felt, because of what Schaeffer had shown, that when I found out you could study philosophy, I felt like it would be the thing that would help me integrate and all the other things too. I also felt, all these years I've taught logic, that whatever the particular argument is that you're looking at, the fundamental premises might not even have been expressed, and they're philosophical commitments. So why it's like, why bother to have the argument? You need to get down and figure out what the assumptions are.
So it's always fascinating. I tell people, whenever I run into people who are like really worried about whether the world outside their head exists, I say, like, hey, I know somebody who has a book about how to make contact with reality and how to confidently know that you have done so, right? Because for me, this is never an issue. But I know for some, it's a real issue for some people, and you're one of those people who opened me up to it.
Different ways the modernist mindset manifests, and I'm sure if I were the one interviewing you, you could put your finger on kind of the wreckage in your own life of this outlook. So it just might not take the form mine did, but.
Let me tell you a story and then see how you react. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I was at a conference in Jerusalem. It was like a workshop, and there was a physicist from MIT. So he's an associate professor at MIT in physics, Jeremy England. And he was supposed to give a paper on Jewish philosophical theology from a physicist's perspective, right? You know, it's going to be an interesting paper. He stood up there and essentially said, I'm not going to talk about my paper. You can read it on your own time. I want to, it was almost comical. He said, I want to tell you what my colleagues think that we're doing as scientists. And then I want to tell you what I actually think that we're doing as scientists. And he began to lay out, essentially point for point, what Michael Polanyi argued in Personal Knowledge as to what he actually thought was going on. Like, you know, my friends, they think that we're clinically and coldly collecting facts and putting them in a pile and stacking them up and sifting through the pile and coming up with theories, et cetera. The old classical view of scientism. But I think we're actually just a group of people who are, he didn't say these words, but traditioned and biased in a particular way to see significance. And he just laid it out almost perfectly, and almost a Kuhnian, Polanyian view of science. And afterwards I went up to him and I said, that was pretty amazing that you did that whole spiel and you never mentioned like Thomas Kuhn or Michael Polanyi the entire time. And he said, who? And it was being entirely sincere. He'd never heard of either of them. And I said, well, Thomas Kuhn, he's emeritus professor at MIT in the history and philosophy of science. Like he had no idea. He really thought he had stumbled onto like the secret sauce that scientists were telling themselves these big lies about what they're doing. And I ran into this when I was giving a talk to some nuclear engineers of all places once, some Christian nuclear engineers. And I said, here's what people will tell you what they're doing as scientists, but here's something like closer to what they actually are doing. And they agreed. They said, but then one guy asked me, he said, but why does my stuff work? Right. And he said, I hear you. I think you're right. What you described, that's a myth. But the other thing you described is actually what we do. So my only answer was, and I want to hear your answer to this too, is my answer was, well, I think the reason why your stuff works is because you constantly check what you're doing against the real world. You don't live in a romantic fairyland, but you have to like check it as to what, reality will kick, as you say, reality gives as good as it gets. It'll kick back and tell you, no, not so fast. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, what would be your fuller response to that? And then B, do you think Christians live in reality? To ask you some boutique questions. I'll tell you what my
response would be, and then I'd like to talk about reality, and then I'd like to consider the do we live in reality question third.
Okay.
My first response is there's nothing wrong with doing science experiments. What's wrong is the philosophical move of making that the paradigm of knowledge. So what Polanyi taught us is that we rely on clues and indwell them to invite and shape and be blessed by a transformative integrative pattern, which is the moment of discovery. And I have argued in Loving to Know, another book, that reality is kind of like it's person-like, and really, if it's person-like, what we should be doing is inviting the real, and that means kind of more like a wedding. You pledge to love, honor, and obey, and then if you're graced, reality self-discloses. Well, it's like that. So good science experiments fall into the my description of inviting the real, and what Polanyi, another phrase that Polanyi gave us was destructive analysis. And so in subsidiary-focal integration, think, golfing, if you revert, or the bike riding, if you revert to focus on what you should be subsidiarily indwelling, the whole pattern goes away, right? And sometimes you kind of have to do that. You have to memorize the multiplication table. You have to learn Hebrew. It's uncomfortable, right? Until you get to the place where you can wear it, right? But then you see that whole realm of the subsidiary. Let's talk about, wearing Hebrew as you do, it actually can be trained and made better. It can be mistaken. It can need to be fixed. It can get so good that there's artistry in it, right? But that all comes of seeing that as subsidiary. And so I would say you honor the real in your scientific work by that care, but you have to see the whole thing as subsidiary artistry to invite the real. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. It makes sense to me. I just want to clarify. I often use the term kind of like when we're focusing, the focal point that you've been saying, this the focal point is like learning grammar and vocab. But there's a point where it has to cross over into fluency, where the words come.
This switching to make it subsidiary.
Yeah, the subsidiary is more like fluency. Focal is more like focusing on, okay, I need to remember what this word means in this language. Okay.
Yeah.
So now I'm really interested in what you have to say about reality.
Well, I do, and this has grown. This really is the main theme of my life because I was the baby skeptic, right? So really the thing I did my dissertation on in Michael Polanyi was this magical sentence where he would say, you've made contact with reality when you have this unspecifiable sense of an inexhaustive range of indeterminate future manifestations. And, the sense of future prospects. And he actually talked about the discoverer kind of navigating in light of the yet to be known, because they can have a sense of getting closer to it. And then when reality shows up, you have this, I called it an IFM effect, indeterminate future manifestations. This sense of we sense its reality because we sense these possibilities. And you can expect for it to turn up all over the place. So in my trying to make sense of that in Longing to Know, I said it's not so much that reality answers our questions as that it explodes them. So it's like, you've made contact with reality when it kind of walks in and takes over. Yeah, you can think of examples, tsunamis and things, that just kind of walk over.
You find yourself in the woods with a wild animal, right?
Right. And you're
all of a sudden it gets to determine. Yeah.
You might remember in Longing to Know the whole story of the copperhead in my, behind my house, right? So that's a great example that when I finally picked out what my daughters were there saying, look at, reality shifted. It just shifted in that moment. That's how you've made contact with reality. So I went on to argue that reality is kind of person-like in that way. If you have a face-to-face encounter, you are changed. And that's how reality is. That's kind of how you've made contact with reality. And so in our defective modern mindset with regard to knowledge, there's also a defective modern mindset with regard to the real. And in a way, this comes first. So that I did not trust reality outside my mind. I kind of was in the Zechariah position. Oh, yeah. Well, that's a part of our legacy in modernity, that we have been disconnected from the real. We effectively, the word acedia, we effectively are living out a refusal to consent to the real. And so we have depersonalized the real. We have reduced its richness so to justify our abusive commodification. I have to say, this is all the kind of the power play of modernity, which I think the postmoderns understood, and we still do. Right. So, what I think.
And can I stop you there just for clarification? Sorry. Because I think what you said is a key move that most people don't catch. They think of modernism and postmodernism. If they think of them at all, they think of postmodernism about truth is out the window. And I feel like the postmodern move is actually like, no, power is now we're going to admit that it's been power this whole time.
What is the crucifixion if it is not a question of power? There's lots of things there.
Talking about Christians in reality, my simplified view would be that Christians kind of made their bed with modernism, which is what made postmodernism the double boogeyman. Even postmodernism has its own philosophical issues that we want to work through. But truth is easy. It's domesticatable. It's something I can keep in, I can control. And if it's actually about power, which is the postmodern critique in some ways, that's what really makes Christians nervous, is that we can't just tell people what's true and then they have to listen and then we have to do things in light of that. So where do you put this, the Christian interaction with, and also just like the Christian's response to reality? Do you think Christians are inviting the real on the whole? Feel free to critique and celebrate what's good and maybe not so good.
Well, in my adult years, I've been in what's known as the Reformational tradition, which, I met you in.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things around Geneva that we would say a lot is we need a strong doctrine of creation. So, and, I'm reading your book these days, getting ready to write a paper on it. And, you make the point about creation plus, you got harkening back to creation, all of that. Well, I've come to feel like we need a stronger doctrine of creation. I feel that what Protestant believers are missing is metaphysics. They don't, I mean, one of the modernist prejudice outlawed lots of things, and philosophy was one of it. It's like intrinsically anti-philosophical. And to kind of re-say it in maybe more accessible ways from a biblical point of view, it's like it ought to be the case that we can hardly get over Genesis 1:1. That it's like, that is stunning. And I think that, in the Reformational tradition, we try to say we need to put creation before fall, redemption and restoration. I feel like the way it often plays out is you show your spirituality by exalting the evil. And then anything good has to be cast in kind of as a response to brokenness. And Lord knows there's lots and lots and lots of brokenness, but there's not the kind of the simple exuberance about the fact that anywhere my eye looks, it's the word of the Lord, and it's showing up and it's there and it's so cool. I mean, the fact that it exists is absolutely stunning. I'm all for the incarnation being the most cool thing. But I think historically, and you may know this better than I, but historically, the incarnation is what helped us see that creation itself is a cool thing. It's like the incarnation showed us how to delight in things. And so one person I've read in recent years is Michael Hanby, who's best friends with D.C. Schindler. I'm a D.C. Schindler fangirl. But both of these guys are philosophers, contemporary Christian metaphysicians. And in Hanby's book on science, he says that really an account of particular things is distinctively at home in a Christian approach. So I'm arguing in my new book that we have dismissed the kind of the, not magic, I don't know what the right word is, the primacy of things. And so I think we need to get back to honoring that. I don't know. I'm arguing we need to get back to what I'm calling a metaphysics of childhood. The people that do this are the the babies.
That's interesting. I was reading some stuff for a book I'm working on recently that's talked about so many different things that children do that we lose as you get older. And it's wonder, like kindness to strangers, which comes really naturally to most children, but gets snapped out of them at some point. But that a lot of them have to do with what you called inviting the real, just like, oh, I wonder what this person has to say.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Or
wonder
saying,
what this is.
Look at that! Look at that! Look at that!
Yeah.
I mean, show a baby a new object, and they're in awe.
Or my favorite one, I'll cry every time I watch these videos, but a baby who has a cochlear implant put on, and then they can hear for the very first time their mother's voice, and you're like, okay, I can't anymore. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. There's one out there about of them putting glasses on this little baby.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that one, but it's similar. You can hardly stand looking at it. It's so beautiful.
Or even, I know you love this one too. They have there's a certain type of color blindness that can be corrected with a particular type of glasses. And, these old men that get given these glasses as a gift and they put them on and they just instantly start weeping from the beauty of reality.
That's so beautiful. So I do feel that our well-intended theology, which is entitled, I think it's good theology. But it's entitled to exuberance in the real and modeling the person-likeness of the real and the interpersonhoodness of our involvement with it. I think that we human persons were designed for communion with the real. We were designed to be lovers of the real. And I think we're downplaying that because we skip too fast to Genesis 3. But I think we do that because we haven't done our metaphysical homework.
And we can also downplay it. This is Nietzsche's critique, that Christianity just become a world-fleeing theology. It's all about escaping this world. And I mean, I don't think he's correct in this critique, but he is correct. A lot of people do believe that. The goal is just to get into heaven.
I agree. Yeah. Well, and I think it's so prevalent. I've been reading about beauty, and artists with regard to beauty, and somehow it sounds spiritual and religious to make it all about God and not about this dark, broken world. And so beauty, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, which is a lovely song, and it's true. But it also can, if you don't watch it, it denigrates this stuff. And I don't think that's our first position. In Longing to Know, there's that chapter called Contact with Reality. And so when you have trust of reality in philosophy, that's called realism. So if the position of realism is that you affirm that there's a real objective world independently of your mind, which was like my big question, right? But I have to say that even when I wrote the dissertation, and then, so that would have been in, 1980 something. And then Longing to Know came along in 2003. Even then, even through that process, my skepticism has lingered. So there came this point. I've written some books since then, and one of them is called Little Manual for Knowing. And that came out in 2014. And I was teaching the book, and I realized I had uttered, like written in there, something about trusting reality. And I went, oh, did I say that? Is reality going to get me? Is it going to like come back and bite me? That was my response. And, to get to the place where I now feel like I call it exuberant realism. I like the image of, splashing about in one of these hot springs that has a bottomless hole to aquamarine subterranean depths. I mean, that's what I picture. And so splashing about in the real, which I would call philosophizing. But in any case, all the ingredients of that are in Longing to Know, but it's over the years. And maybe being a grandparent That's kind of helped me to shift so that I feel like trusting this unbelievably lively reality, this dynamically overflowing existence that is this incredible implication of Genesis 1:1. It's taken me a while to get to that.
Well, thank God we can benefit from that road you've traveled ahead of us, and hopefully we can arrive there with you sooner rather than later. Thank you, Dr. Esther Meek, who's been a personal mentor of mine over the last couple of decades. Thank you for your wisdom and your guidance.
You're so welcome. Thank you for helping me mark the milestone of Longing to Know turning 20.
Yes, happy 20th anniversary to Longing to Know, and looking forward to anniversaries of future books.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Biblical Mind podcast, exploring the deep structures of Christian scripture. For more, visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org. Subscribe to this podcast at all the usual places so you never miss an episode.